Hey guys, welcome back to pre-production. It's so nice to have you here again. Thank you so much for listening. I have an amazing guest with me this week. I am very, very honored to have Mr. C. Robert Cargill on the podcast. I'm a big fan. He is the writer of the Sinister films, as well as Doctor Strange and The Black Phone, and a short in VHS 85. And he has The Black Phone 2 coming up, and he's also an accomplished novelist. Uh, Please leave some words for other people. Why do you take all the words?
Uh, you know, uh, it's the only thing people will pay me for.
That
I've
makes
tried,
sense.
I've tried making money other ways, but the words they'll pay me for. So I take all the words. I mean, you even mentioned that I was a film critic and that you knew me as a film critic, but that's fine. I mean, I've been stealing all the words for 25 years. So let's see what I can do.
That's something I'm actually excited to talk to you about because I'm going through this transition myself of trying to figure out exactly what it feels like to be known primarily as a film reviewer, film critic, film buff guy who talks about other people's movies into professionally making my own. And there's always pressure. There's always a lot of anxiety and stress around making your first movie. But when you're not known for anything else and you're just about to debut your first film and nobody knows your name, nobody knows who you are, there's this real sense of like, well, this movie could go either way. And you're not going to the film because this filmmaker made it. You're just watching it because the concept is interesting. You don't care about Joe Schmo's directorial debut. You just think maybe the movie sounds good. But in the case of somebody who's made their name somewhere else, who's now trying to do this other thing and break into some other form of the industry, there's expectations that aren't there for your average first time filmmaker. And in your case, you came right out of the gate swinging with a big movie starring Ethan Hawke, a fairly legendary actor. And I can only imagine that making that transition from talking about movies like through Spill and other sources to writing them and really being in the industry was probably a fairly stressful experience.
Oh, very. I mean, I would contest coming out swinging. It was a $3 million movie with an actor who, when we polled for test audiences, no one under the age of 30 had heard of. Like we were really like me and Scott, Scott was coming back from, what was perceived as a failure, which wasn't a failure, it was a critical failure with Day the Earth Stood Still, but it was a financial success, but people remembered it flopping. Ethan had been doing art house stuff, but had kind of fallen off and wasn't getting the phone wasn't ringing as often anymore. And yeah, and I'm coming out of being a film critic for 10 years and having that not only like you're talking about like being known for something else, like that is a whole thing. There's actually there's a great YouTube mini doc right now from Be Kind Rewind about Sofia Coppola's acting career, and the whole thing ends with her first movie. Like it's a 50-minute doc on everything that happens before Virgin Suicides, and she gets to the premiere of her film. She's there premiering it at Sundance, and one of the first questions is, "So let's talk about Godfather 3."
Oh God.
So
And
and
that is
and
what it's like, yeah.
yeah, and so it is like that. But when you make your career as a critic, but you do a lot of film celebration. I don't really want to watch somebody kick something in the nuts for an hour unless it's Lindsay Ellis going after Phantom of the Opera. Like it's got to be like that. Nobody cares if you hop on and kick an old 1986 film in the balls for 30 minutes. Like it's like no, no, no. I want to watch something cool. Let me watch something positive. I was coming out of like hardcore online film review when we were cutting our teeth on the early internet, before social media, when film review blogs were still destination locations, and and I was on Ain't It Cool News to start, which was one of the top 500 websites every day. It was always in the top 500. It was getting mad traffic. I was a 25-year-old video store clerk when I started, and I was slagging bad movies and praising good movies and, having controversial opinions from there. And after 10 years of that, I was going into the market with a low budget horror movie. And I knew that if I didn't succeed, it was going to be a punchline. I spent a lot of time in the late aughts talking publicly, but also privately with film critics about how Rotten Tomatoes and how what I call play journalism kind of changed the landscape and how there weren't going to be jobs for a lot of us in a few years. And people jokingly refer to me as Cargill Little. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. Well, I was right. I got out, and I had to come out swinging. And I needed to, even if it was a small movie, I needed people to go, "Oh, yeah, Cargill's a good writer. Or he's a decent writer. That bare minimum was decent writer." I needed that, or else I knew I was cooked. And Scott, coming off of Day the Earth Stood Still, he was like, look, this might be the last movie anyone lets me make. Like, I've been spending 4 years going out for TV shows and movies and coming in second place every time. Someone's letting me make a movie. This might be it. And so when we sat down to write the script, we did so with the mindset of this might be the only film we get to make together. That this could be Scott's last film as a director. This could be my last film as a screenwriter. And so we decided, let's leave it all out in the fucking field. Let's write the best fucking thing we can and make this movie like like our careers depend on it because our careers fucking depend on it. And the result was Sinister. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, it worked out, honestly. I mean, I remember seeing Sinister in theaters. I went to a late showing like the Thursday prior to its official Friday release at a local Cinemark. And from the opening, like 8 millimeter footage of the hanging, I immediately, because at the time I had seen Day the Earth Stood Still and Exorcism of Emily Rose, which I love. I think that movie is
mhm,
super fucking underrated.
so great.
But from that first image, I knew that I was watching a movie that people cared about making. There was like that's not your normal opening. And it's also not the way that I was used to your average horror film opening because it's asking you to pay attention. It's really just one angle. The camera doesn't move, and you don't know what you're looking at for like at least a minute until the hanging starts and you're like, fuck. And you don't exactly know the context, obviously, but it's disturbing and it's unnerving. And it's crazy how easy it is to know quickly that you're in the hands of a filmmaker that's doing something special. And I had known you at the time from Spill, and so I actually didn't know when I saw it when it said like written by. So I was like, "Who's that?" Because I knew your username and all
You knew
that,
me as Carlisle on
Exactly,
Spill.
exactly. And of course, later I realized the truth and was extremely excited. And yeah, Sinister is an incredible film. I've watched it like 3 times. At the time, in like 2013-ish, horror was in a strange place. Movies like Babadook or The Pact were starting to sort of, impress me and get to a place where horror was getting back to a more sort of prestige place where you could tell that people cared about the movies they were making, and it wasn't just like jump scare, jump scare, jump scare, jump scare. It was like, no, we're gonna like save horror and make horror the most profitable genre out there.
Well, yeah, horror kind of just got maimed really badly in the 90s. The early 90s, horror had become a joke. Those of us that were into it, it was few and far between for really good stuff. It was a real wasteland there. Um, and then Scream happened, and Scream was really controversial at the time. People forget that. Scream was one of those things that uh, the mainstream is like, oh yeah, horror's back, and then horror fans are like, this is just making fun of horror films, and it's just kind of referencing horror films. It's not even like making good commentary, and it's just a bunch of pretty teens getting cut up. We did that 15 years ago. Are we really back to that again? And we got this spate of pretty teen movies in which everybody was knocking off Wes. And we got that for a while, and then that started to fall off, and then J horror came in, and then J horror, of course, we ended up, 9/11 happened. We ended up in a war. These type of things always fuck up art. And the reaction to it was to dive into the 70s and get gritty and gross and raw with what would be called torture porn. And the act of calling it torture porn would put a very big negative spin on it. And so that started dying out and petering off very quickly. And then Jason comes along with Paranormal Activity, and all of a sudden that's a huge fucking hit. And then everybody's like, well, what is horror supposed to be now? And nobody really had a beat on it. And you had two big producers at the time, Roy Lee and Jason Blum, and they both had the same idea at the same time. What if we gave really talented filmmakers who Hollywood shoot up and spit out $1 million to go off and make what they want to make and get a low budget horror movie by a high, by a high budget, high talented filmmaker. And so when I brought the idea to Scott, which I pitched him over drinks, he knew exactly who wanted to hear it. And a week and a half later, after pitching it, I'm literally in a back-to-back meeting. I'm in an office with Roy Lee at 1:30, and then by 3 o'clock, I'm in Jason Blum's office and pitching that movie. And they both started bidding over it. And by the end of the bidding, at the end of the week, we had a $3 million budget to make Sinister, and it was like, what the hell is going on? This is madness. But the thing is that all the people that were into horror knew that there was this Wild West about to happen. Like anything could go, 15, a $50,000 movie just made over $100 million. Clearly we can do stuff and make real money with very little output. But we need the right voices. That's what they knew, and that's where they succeeded. It's the same thing that happened in Marvel. Kevin Feige's whole thing, if you look at the golden age of Marvel, it was Kevin Feige going out to all these directors that had made these smaller, really interesting films and hadn't really made their huge budget epic action movies. They weren't going after the Wolfgang Petersons. They were going after the Scott Derricksons and the Taika Waititis and, these really, talented filmmakers who'd made smaller films, but they could see making big films. So that's really where that kind of took off. And once the movie started making money and those budgets, we got kind of knocked around in the press for, our disappointing opening weekend of $18 million. Uh, the third highest grossing rated R film in October at that time. But it was a
On a budget
disappointment.
of three, on a
On a
budget of
budget of
three,
three, the
that's
minute that got mentioned, people were like, well, it made 6 times its budget back opening weekend. So was it really that big? And when you look at it in context, it's like we were the third highest grossing movie. We were just like $200,000 shy of the number two movie of that week, which is Argo, that went on to win Best Picture. And that was behind the second weekend or third weekend of Taken 3, which was just this massive juggernaut. So we did great.
yeah.
We were fucking over the moon. We were like, oh my God, we made $18 million opening weekend. That's great. Once movies like that were happening and getting the reviews they were getting and doing decently at the box office, all of a sudden there was a big interest in some more esoteric horror, and that's where you start getting stuff like The Babadook and It Follows, and the whole trend that would then trend up all through the teens of mainstream audiences accepting horror as also art films, that you could go to see an art horror film on a Friday night and that would be a great thing to do. That was not something that was popular before then. You didn't see the art films being mentioned in the trades very often. They were just these small weird things that Midnight would pick up, and then us nerds would pass around together.
Right.
um
I mean, even like older films like Possession would be like the type of movie where, we knew about it, but nobody really knew about it. It didn't open
yeah,
big. It didn't make, break down doors or barriers or anything. But the people who love that kind of stuff were like, why can't we get more films like this?
yeah. And those were the movies we would pass around to each other, back before the digital age. We would have physical copies and hand it to a friend and go, watch this, bring it back tomorrow, we'll talk. I read one of the worst experiences I ever had was my friend who did that to me regularly, handed me Gummo, and I literally drove back to his house 10 minutes after finishing Gummo and threw it on his bed and said, what the fuck is that? He goes, I know, right? I just had to talk to somebody about it. Uh,
Someone had to understand how I feel. Oh my
yes.
God. I always love talking to you about horror because you've written really good horror movies
Thank
and you're working with, I think, one of the best directors who's working in the industry, Scott Derrickson. But you also are just a massive fan. And you kind of have to be at that level, You can't fake
Oh
it.
yeah.
You can't fake a good horror movie. You got to really love it. You've got to feel like this is important. And like you said, it was important to you for multiple reasons, not just as a fan of horror, but from a career perspective because you're making a shift and it's got to land.
Literally, when we shot Sinister and me and Scott watched the cut together, the first thing we said is, well, look, if nobody likes this movie, then nobody wants us because that's our movie, and we just left it all out in the field. So love it or hate it, those are the movies we're going to make. And then people really liked it. So
Yeah,
we got it went the right way for us, but it very easily could have gone a different way where people were just saying, oh, this is not good.
right.
And then that would have been it for us.
So I'm curious to like take you backwards a little bit and
Okay.
maybe into your youth. And I'd love to know if you have a memory of where you first discovered your love for movies, or if it was something that's just always been there and you can't even pinpoint it.
Well, it's a little of both. My earliest memory is in a movie theater. And, I was 4 years old and I'm looking up at the movie theater screen and there's two suns and there's this farm boy staring out at these two suns. And I just was, instantly like, why does he get two? I only have one. And then by the end of that movie, I was just like, I had been so transfixed, and that movie was wired into my DNA from that point. I would find out years later, I did not realize this growing up, but my parents were nerds. My parents don't present as nerds. You would never think it. They're conservative Christians, have voted Republican their whole life. My dad was in the military. It was a very milk toast, very middle class American family. But whenever a Star Trek movie opened, we were there opening night. And I thought that's what families did. You went out to Star Trek movies. Star Trek, the Next Generation's on Saturday. The family sits down and watches it. Like, yeah, everybody does that, right? I would go out into the garage where my dad had his old books from high school, and he had all the Planet of the Apes adaptations, and I thought that was just normal stuff that every family had. I read my first book, my first novel, when I was 8. I was madly in love with Drew Barrymore. We're a few months apart, um, and my aunt knew this, and I really wanted to go see her new movie. I was very excited. I heard about it. I was very excited. I want to see her new movie. Told my parents how excited I was, and they're like, "We're not taking you to a Stephen King movie. That's not happening." And my aunt had heard about this because my parents thought it was funny. And she bought me a copy of Firestarter with Drew Barrymore on the cover with the poster. And my parents were like, "Why did you buy our kid a Stephen King novel?" I'm like, "He's not going to read it. He's 8. He's just going to look at the picture." Well, sure enough, I read that thing cover to cover 3 times, and by the third time reading it, I realized this Stephen King guy, he got paid to write this, and that would be a cool job when I grew up, right?
Hmm.
So that was really where that switch got flipped. Um, and so once my mom realized I'd read the book, her first reaction was, well, if my son's going to be reading novels, he's going to be reading the important ones. So the first thing she did is she went out and bought me The Hobbit, and gave me The Hobbit. And that was the second book I read. So for any of you out there who are like, oh, I've been a fan of Cargill for a while, all of a sudden hearing those two books back to back are the formative books in my first experience, the first thing that I remember is Star Wars. It's like, oh, okay, this all tracks. This guy was always supposed to be this guy. But yeah, so that was the love the whole time. The other big thing is that my parents being nerds is we had HBO from when I was a young kid, so we always had HBO around. And I grew up on Air Force bases because my dad was in the Air Force, so um we were always behind fences and it was very safe, so I was allowed to kind of come and go in a way you would never let a kid today, to the point that my mom would go shopping at the commissary. The commissary was right across the street from the movie theater. So she would plan her shopping trip for the Saturday matinee, and she would drop 5-year-old me off at the movie theater, pay for my ticket, and then I would go in and watch a movie while she went across the street and shopped, and then would come and pick me up when the movie was over.
Sounds fucking awesome.
It was fucking, I was 8 years old. I remember, I remember I'm 12 years old, 1987. I'm walking to the movie theater to go see a movie. And I run into a problem I hadn't run into in a long time. And they're like, "I'm sorry, sir. But they didn't say sir, actually. I've been old for too long. I'm sorry. This movie's rated R. You're 12 years old. You're not allowed to see it. And I'm like,
Please
it's
tell me
Die
it's the movie.
Hard.
Okay, sweet.
It's Die Hard. I've seen
Yeah.
it 3 times already. There's nothing in it I'm not allowed to see. My parents keep taking, and they're like, "Well, you should have had your parents come this time." And so I didn't get to see Die Hard a fourth time in the theater.
Wow.
But yeah, so the Air Force used to they would run the because they were a single screen theater and they would send the prints around to all the bases. So when a movie wasn't playing in theaters anymore, it would show up on base for a couple days,
Oh,
and so
wow.
you'd get to see things that you'd heard about but hadn't got a chance to see yet.
So it's
Uh,
kind of like your neighborhood dollar theater that gets movies like 6 months after they come out.
Yeah, and because the Air Force owned the prints and would send them around all the bases. And so I remember one time in particular, I had gone to see Shocker, and
Mitch Pileggi.
they didn't get the print in, and so they had kept over the print that they had for the day. So I had to see Always by Steven Spielberg, a film I still have much love for. I know other people don't. I like the original, A Guy Named Joe, and I like Always, but I saw Always the right way. I saw it when I was, 14 years old in a
Sure.
movie theater, not planning on seeing it, and then really enjoying it. But
Good.
so yeah, I saw lots of random stuff that way. I would go, I don't know what this movie is, but it's called Starship, so I'm going to go see it. So I saw a lot of crazy 80s B movies at the movie theater as a kid alone because if it was rated PG, I could just buy a ticket. Didn't matter how old I was. So yeah, it was kind of awesome, but I mean, it was really awesome. But the thing is that was my youth. So I was going to easily in a theater 50, 100 movies a year as a
Wow.
kid. Seeing because I have all these vivid memories of these movies I saw in the theaters, and so I was just a film lover from the womb. I literally got a job in a video store not because I needed to, but I took a pay cut to work in a video store because I wanted to work in a video store because that just seemed like a dream. And for a short period of time, it was. Um, but yeah, I'm one of those weirdos. I'm one of the last filmmakers to have been able to work in a video store, while
Hmm.
also one of the first filmmakers to have come out of blogging. So I'm right in that weird sweet spot of having done both.
Yeah,
Um,
that's how I
yeah.
feel about YouTube because we're currently in this state where someone who gets a film made who comes from YouTube, it's still rare. The talk to me's
Mhm.
of the world don't happen all the time yet. It's still kind of a stigma. But that's not going to be, 10, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, every new filmmaker will probably have some kind of social media imprint of some kind, whether it's on Facebook
Mhm.
or X or YouTube channel. If YouTube existed in the 70s and 80s, all of our iconic filmmakers would have probably been trying to upload their, 8 millimeter movies, 16
Oh yeah.
millimeter movies to this thing that,
Oh,
could have
dude.
gotten themselves seen.
Robert Rodriguez would have been a YouTuber,
Yeah,
like
for
without
sure.
a doubt. Like Robert was fighting to get anywhere he could. He would have gone straight to YouTube. I remember, talking about Spill going way back. Corey would animate these episodes of Spill. He would upload them to Apple because Apple was where you kind of where a bunch of the nerds uploaded stuff. And I started going, hey, just send them to me. I'm going to upload them to YouTube. He goes, what the hell is YouTube? I'm like, it's this new service. I think it's right for what we're doing. Like the idea of having somebody, this is how far back we go. What's YouTube? Um, but so being a big consumer of YouTube, I watch YouTube every day. I'm a big YouTube viewer. I was early premium. I love premium. When I want to unwind in bed, I grab a whiskey or something and sit down in bed with my wife, and we watch the monologues from the late shows that we like, and then we watch a mini doc or two, watch a cooking show, I watch a lot of content. And what I've really noticed is there isn't the stigma on YouTube anymore because so many outside sources like the late shows heavily rely on YouTube now. It's kind of raised all the boats. When you're in this, when you've got Seth Meyers creating YouTube only content, you're now running in the same league with A-listers. And so nobody that I ran into saw the Talk to Me guys coming from YouTube as a bad thing. Everybody
Mhm.
saw it as a plus. It's like, oh, they're established. They're just not these new guys. They're these really talented guys who have been hooping it for a while, and that's their backstory. And now they've made this great horror film. So,
And
you
that's
know,
great, and I I think that that's something that COVID helped strangely
Hmm.
is everyone kind of looked at things that they could watch at home during that period as a privilege all of a sudden. Like, oh, well, I can't go to the
Yeah.
movies. I can't do this. I can't do that, but I got YouTube at least. But I also do think that the stigma that I've experienced is more on the end of trying to get the financing. Once the
Hmm.
movie's out, once Talk to Me is out and people have seen it, it's premiered and done well at festivals and people are giving it good reviews, they're like, "Hey, cool, come join the party."
Yeah.
But when you're in that place, and I talked to Danny Filippo a little bit about this, like when you're in that place where you're trying to get somebody to pay attention to this idea, like, pre-financing, pre-shooting, all of that stuff, that's when it gets a little sort of like because the sort of
They're
perception of
still
the
seen
you
as an amateur.
yeah, the perception of a YouTuber is somebody who's going to go make a movie about their channel or about their character they play or, about their style of content. And
Yeah.
it's like plenty of these people, Mystery Guitar Man, Joe Penna, who made Arctic with Mads Mikkelsen, plenty of these people don't want to do that. They're tired of being the face. They want to be behind the
Hmm.
camera. But that's sort of like how I view this sort of like weird transition you talked about, where it's like you got bloggers and you've got print critics and you've got video stores and all of that stuff, and then streaming's starting up. It's interesting when you start doing something that monumental, making a movie, and it does as well as it did. Sinister again is a really damn good horror movie. Having seen the rest of your work, what I'm kind of amazed by is that Doctor Strange is nothing like that. Black Phone is nothing like Sinister. You're very adaptable. You're like a chameleon in a way. Some of my favorite filmmakers will make a movie and I can always sort of feel like, well, that's them doing that thing that they do and they're
Hmm.
good at it, but that's kind of the you seem to be very adaptable to the needs of the story and the needs of the characters to where the C. Robert Cargill that I know becomes invisible.
That's an amazing compliment. I think the reason why is because a lot of people like to use stylistic flourishes to kind of sign off and be seen. As a screenwriter, screenwriters are generally invisible. We don't tend to get the credit when things go well. That goes to the director. We get the blame when things go badly. It's, if it's a bad movie, it was a bad script. Couldn't possibly be that the director misinterpreted the script and ad-libbed and cut out important scenes in the edit because the screenwriter doesn't need to sit in the editing room. There's an old saying in Hollywood that's very true. A movie's written three times: when it's written as a script, when it's shot, and then when it's edited. Well, as a screenwriter, I get to be around for one of those, and so everybody knows that. So you don't get the credit. If it's a great movie, there's great performances. There's occasionally, people in the industry respect it, and they'll be like, "Oh shit, that's a great movie. That's probably a pretty good script." Um, but yeah, it's one of those things where because we because you get used to that and you get used to being invisible, it allows you to focus on what really matters and what matters in terms of storytelling. And for me, I am someone who always focuses on character. I know that idea is essential to get people in the seats. It's essential to getting something sold. It's essential to selling it. Horror I always refer to as the last purest genre because it's the only genre where you don't need a lot of money, you don't need any name actors. You just need an idea for a story that people go, "Oh, that sounds like a good story. I want to see that." That's all you need to sell a horror film. You don't need any of the other things. You can literally sell a $50,000 movie of three people running around in the woods for an hour and a half, and it can be a fucking blockbuster if it's done right. And so where I focus on the characters, and I figure out who the most interesting characters for that particular story is, and then I try to focus on making those the best characters possible. I don't want any character to enter the film that doesn't interest you in some way, that doesn't have something new to offer, that isn't a twist on a character that you find interesting. They don't not everything has to be new. Sometimes it can be very familiar. You only need to have one or two really cool, clever ideas in a given film to really kind of throw the audience off. But that's where I focus, and I focus on giving each character that's a main character their own unique voice. And if there's anything that I hope I get remembered for as a writer, it's that when you sit down and watch my movies, the characters all feel distinct. They don't sound like each other. They don't look like each other. You really feel that, Ethan Hawke and his character Ellison Oswald and Deputy So and So are cut from very different cloths. That these are very different, wildly different characters interacting with one another. And that ultimately that's ultimate how they view everything differently by the end of the film. And I try to weave those characters into everything that I do so that when you kind of step back and break it apart, you can see that really it was a character story the whole time. And it was about characters being involved in a plot that I think one of the reasons audiences are so disconnected from mainstream storytelling is we've gone too deep into focusing on the plot and focusing on the saleability and don't focus enough on the long-term character arcs in these stories that these stories are great when the characters are great. And if you look at like even you look at the very best Marvel movies, and the very best Marvel movies are all character driven. They're not the plot driven ones. That's where that stuff really kind of lands. And so I think that's I think that's where, if I were to break down why you're experiencing with my writing what you're experiencing, that's what it is. Like, yeah, every genre is different because you treat every genre different. They all have their own different rules. And I've spent my entire life from the time I was 4 just watching nonstop movies and learning the genres inside and out and knowing what each genre needs, and then focusing all my writing time on writing characters. I end up cutting so much dialogue. I write if I didn't cut anything and Scott didn't cut anything, my scripts would be positively Sorkin-esque. In terms of, for those of you that don't know, Sorkin writes like 180, 200-page scripts, shoots them all, and then they're 2 hours long because it's all rapid fire dialogue. And so I write a lot of dialogue because I'm always trying to dial down the character. And then I cut stuff out like people don't need to hear this, but I needed that to get to this next section here. But yeah, that's kind of how I work as a filmmaker is I'm always taking, trying to honor the genre, but then really service the characters.
Well, it shows. One of my favorite examples of cutting dialogue down. I just rewatched The Fugitive recently,
Hmm.
and there's that great moment where I didn't kill my wife. I don't care.
I don't care.
Um, I was watching the making of documentary on the new 4K release, and Andrew Davis, the director, was talking about how there was originally about 3 pages of dialogue between the two in that moment,
Yep.
where Tommy Lee Jones was like, "Well, it's my job as a U.S. Marshal to do yada yada yada, and you're coming with me." And then Harrison Ford said some shit, and I guess actually on the day, according to Andrew Davis in the documentary, these two actors on the set were like, "What if we just did this?" And that's what they did. And it's yet again another one of those moments, like again with Harrison Ford shooting the guy instead of fighting the
Yep.
swordsman. And sometimes, a writer might pull their hair out and, oh my God, you're ruining my script, all that beautiful dialogue. But when you see that scene,
Mm.
that is the barest, bare bones description of why those two characters are heat-seeking missiles for one another. One guy says, I'm innocent. Other guy's like, I don't give a shit. I'm still going to get you. And that's all you need.
Yeah.
And then you're off to the
Um,
races.
yeah, yeah. No truly great writer will be mad about that. It's, great shorthand is the essence of screenwriting. My favorite version of that story is the one that happened on For a Few Dollars More, where Clint Eastwood has this moment where he's got 2 pages of dialogue. Somebody says, "Why did you help us?" And he goes and he tells a backstory that finally gives us the backstory of the man with no name. And he was sick on the day, and he was not in a place to do it. And Clint Eastwood is not a guy that you get to do anything he doesn't want to do. And he said, I got an idea for a line. And so now in the movie is his idea for the line, which is, why did you help us? Because once upon a time, there was a family who needed help and nobody came. And
Mm,
that's it. He says that line. That is the 2 pages of that story condensed. You fill it in and you're just like, oh man, oh, I love that. And it's such a great exchange. And
yeah.
it so defines who the man with no name is. And yeah, so those great moments of boiling down that dialogue into a perfect moment that tells you everything you need to know is the essence of screenwriting. And so that's why I do so much cutting. I'm trying to find what is the essence of this, and then get down to this is the bit of dialogue that that the audience goes, ah, okay, yeah, I
Yeah.
know who this guy is.
When I was very young making short films, I was just writing everything longhand and everything was prose. It was like past tense and all this shit,
Hmm.
because I was just writing the story out on paper and we were going to go shoot it for a couple days and do whatever we were going to do. But once I kind of sat down and was like, all right, if I'm really going to take this seriously, I need to learn how these are written. And I started reading professional screenplays that I could find online. I'd type in Back to the Future PDF or whatever and find it and be like, okay, how do they actually do this? For you, you mentioned reading Firestarter when you were very little. Did you have to, what was the process of learning how to actually write a script and get it to people? What was that like for you?
Well, first things first, I had attempted to write a couple of scripts in the past, like just very small things to be shot for a very small amount of money here in Austin with friends. I had a couple of friends who were very hardcore indie filmmakers. Like, let's take $5,000 and shoot a feature film. We'll shoot it digitally. I'll edit it. I've got a bunch of friends in the industry. They'll all come out and act, like writing for that kind of stuff. And those always kind of fell through. They just never happened. But I had to study and learn the structure. So I had to learn that structure firsthand. And then once I got into Ain't It Cool, a lot of times we would be handed scripts. Harry would be sent scripts daily, and like stuff that was in development. He had, all sorts of
Wow.
stuff. And his big thing was he looked at, there's a lot of stuff that can be said about Harry Knowles. For those of you that know his history, it's not all good. But one thing that can absolutely be said about him positively is that he really did stick to very strong journalistic ethics. He had made a few errors when he was very young that he learned from, and was, very strict about everything. And he would let members of the staff read these scripts, but they never left the house. He always had control of them. So he had this script room out back where you could just come over and pull off, you want to read the latest draft that we've got of Fantastic Four, come on over and read it. You want to read the Spates draft of this thing? Oh man, you got to come check this out. This is great. And there were famous scripts that, were passed around for years that we had that one copy over at Harry's. So I had read so many scripts that I had seen the formatting and learned that, so that when I sat down to write my first real script with Scott, I understood the format of it. And then I also had a director who'd made a couple films already, who had written screenplays before that. Everybody, it's funny how you get looked at as a director. When you're a director, people don't talk about your previous screenwriting work anymore. When people talk about Scott's first film, they talk about, his direct-to-video Hellraiser. Nobody ever mentions urban legend Final Cut.
Dude,
Uh,
so listen to me. I'm going to tell you, nobody except me.
mhm.
Uh, two Halloween specials ago, I did a video for that.
Right
Um,
on.
because honestly, I have a major soft spot for it. I see the clear studio issues that probably existed
Oh yeah.
on display, but the concept of it, i.e., probably one of Scott's contributions, is damn fucking great. I love the idea of a bunch of film students who are having to try to make a horror movie while also being killed one by one. I think that's a fucking great idea. I enjoy urban legend Final. It's the same thing with Shyamalan. Everyone says like Sixth Sense, that was your first movie. And he's like, well, I made a movie with Harvey Weinstein called Wide Awake that was a terrible disaster.
He made
Uh,
two movies before Sixth Sense, and
Praying
Sixth
with
Sense is
Anger.
his first film. Yeah.
Yeah. Praying with Anger was like out of NYU or Tisch or something. And
Yeah.
it showed at TIFF. It got into TIFF, but then didn't get distribution. So, but I've seen it though. There's a VHS rip out there floating around.
There
So.
is.
So obviously you're a writer coming out of Any Cool News and you've written a script. I believe it was originally called Found Footage. I think I have a draft of it somewhere.
It was originally called Super 8.
Super 8, okay.
And then Super 8 came out. The idea was called Super 8. And then Super 8 came out, and that wasn't going to happen. And yeah, we called it, it was then called Home Movies for a while. And then we couldn't, the first drafts that we wrote was called Home Movies. And then while we were developing it, they're like, yeah, another movie's coming out called Home Movies. We got to change that.
There's also,
And
and I'm just going to show you, the viewers won't be able to see this, but there's also a damn good Adult Swim show called Home Movies.
I had missed that one. Yeah, but yeah, then it became found footage, and everybody loved the name found footage until they didn't, and then it was on to the fourth name, and that's the one that stuck.
There's always this point where you've got talent, you've figured out the craft, you've written a few things, you're on your way, but you just need that extra push from somebody or the right person to read your stuff, or the right meeting that happens that results in some kind of funding. So how did you come across someone like Scott Derrickson?
Well, I mean, and this is wherein lies the lesson. Where I found Scott Derrickson is that Scott Derrickson found me. He was a big fan of my writing on Ain't Cool News. And so I was, because he would read it, because most of the people in the industry was reading it at the time. I didn't fully grasp that until well into my career when I would run into celebrities who knew exactly who the fuck I was, for better and for worse. Mostly for the better, but so he became a reader, and he would eventually, at one point, he turned to his wife and he said, I keep reading this guy and he keeps saying everything that I said on the drive home, and so he started realizing that we had these very similar opinions, and saw the same things in film. And so he started to go to movies that he wasn't interested in seeing that I was glowing about. And the first one of those was Bug. And he went to see Bug, and he went, holy shit, everybody else is shitting on this movie. This movie's fucking brilliant. It's great. This guy was right. And so he wrote me a little letter, and thanking me for that, and politely thanking me for my positive review of Emily Rose. And then he went later on and saw Sunshine and went, holy shit, again, this guy has turned me onto a movie that other people are hating on. And he wrote me again, and we started writing back and forth, and we became friends. And he one time, Harry really kind of changed the day for him. He had dropped a 3 to 5 minute bit from Day the Earth Stood Still with Keanu, and it's a great fucking scene. It's got this really brilliant camera work in it. Um, it's just really cool. And the online, everybody loved it, just buzzed about it. People were like, oh, we're excited for this movie. And then Harry, a few hours in, wrote his takedown of it and everything that's wrong about it, and everything that is, why The Day the Earth Stood Still is not going to be a good movie. And then this was at the period of time where Harry was at the height of his powers. And so the internet went, and everybody started dumping on it. Just ruined Scott's day. He can't sleep. He's up late at night. He's like, everybody's going to hate my movie. What the fuck is up with Harry Knowles? And he's like, I know a guy who knows Harry Knowles. I'm going to ask him. And so he wrote me and he said, what the fuck? And so I wrote them this letter back and just said, hey, look, here's what you have to understand about Harry. His dad was a collector. He, made a living selling collectibles at conventions. He would drop Harry from the time he was 3 years old in the 16 millimeter movie room and let him watch movies all day. And I bet you, bottom dollar, Harry has seen that movie projected on 16 millimeter at least 50 times in his life. And this movie's in his DNA, and he's not going to see any version other than that movie as being a version worth watching. And Scott wrote me back this great letter and was like, "Oh my God, I never even thought of that. Oh, this is a fanboy reaction to this. This isn't a critic reaction to this. Oh shit, I can sleep now." And he went and got a great night's sleep because he understood where the place was coming from, and it wasn't a place of malice or about his filmmaking. It was about Harry being protective of this. When I would tell Harry this story, Harry went, "Oh, at least 50 times." At least he goes bare minimum. And so Scott started writing me and asking me career stuff like, hey, what do you think about this? Should I take this movie? Should I take this? How would you feel about me making a movie like this? And we started talking as friends that way, and then decided to get together in Vegas. We were both in Vegas at the same time. We were both on Twitter. We saw that we were each in Vegas. And we're like, let's get together for drinks. And so we got together for drinks just to hang out. And he was being courted by, as I mentioned earlier, Roy Lee and Jason Blum. And they were like, bring us the right idea and we'll give you $1 million to make this movie. And so we kicked around this idea, and he wanted my professional opinion and asked me my professional opinion for him. Absolutely. He bounces this idea off me. I give him my notes. Like, that's cool. That's great. Yeah, that'd work. That's a movie you can make for $1 million. Yeah, sure. And I said, I've had this idea rattling around in my head for years. Pitch it to a couple of friends. I think it's kind of ready. Can I get your professional opinion since I gave you my? Yeah, sure. Everybody pitches me once. It's your one time. Pitch me. And I pitched him Sinister. And at the end of the pitch, he said, "Holy fuck, I want to make that movie." He's like, "This is the movie those guys are waiting for." And we were off to the races. Literally a week and a half later, I am sitting in the office of Roy Lee and then later Jason Blum, these guys who make these movies. And, I'm sitting in front of Jason Blum and he's like, "Okay, so tell me about your movie, kid." And I'm like, he didn't say kid, he says buddy. Buddy is his thing. Buddy, buddy, buddy. I'll tell you. So tell me about it, buddy. My answer was, "Well, those found footage movies." He goes, "Yeah, I make them." I'm like, "Well, this is the movie about the guy that finds the found footage." And he just leans forward in his chair. He's like, "I'm listening." And me and Scott pitched the rest of the movie. And by the end of the week, I had a movie deal. And Scott asked me if I wanted to write it with him. And he said, "Ordinarily, I just pay you $50,000 for the idea, but I just lost my writing partner. I've read your writing. I know you can write. Let's see how it works out." And it did work out. We enjoyed writing together. And a few weeks in, he asked me if I would just be his writing partner. And that's how we got together. We've been together 13 years now.
That's beautiful. And rare also to
Hmm.
sort of have it sort of be so everything coalesce like that. Just two people genuinely enjoying creating something that also happens to be marketable and good. And
Yeah.
people in suits, so to speak, going, "Hey, I like that," and then getting to make it.
Yeah.
Speaking of making it, as a writer, I'm curious because I have writer friends who are very much so against being on set. They don't want to see that part. How do you feel about being on set? Were you on set for Sinister?
Oh, yeah. Uh, Almost every single day. I think anyone that doesn't want to be on set needs to reevaluate their thinking on that. Absolutely. Writers should be on set. Now, you need to learn your place as a writer on the set. The thing is that you are there to at the disposal of the writer or of the director, and you're there to service them and help them get the movie made. But the thing is that when you're directing a film, you're in a million different places, and having a brain there that whose sole job is just to protect the integrity of the story and the script and the intention, and to be able to answer questions like, what happens if I make this change to the dialogue, and go, "Oh, nothing happens," or, "Oh, no, 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 you can't do that because we already shot the sequence and this line of dialogue is so important to explain this. If you don't say it now, you're going to be ADRing it later and you're going to hate that. So let's get it right." And the thing is when you talk to actors about that, actors 99.9% of the time are like, "Oh yeah, no, okay," because they're thinking about the moment. They're thinking about where their character is in the moment. The director is thinking about the scene, and you need to be there thinking about the story. And so I'm a big fan of the being on set and being the writer on set. And at times it's boring as fuck. At times it is soul crushing. The worst day of a writer's life is not when everything's going wrong on the set. The worst day of a writer's life is any day that they have to shoot wire work action, because you're sitting there on set and there's nothing to comment on.
Hmm.
I mean, it's great watching Mads Mikkelsen and Ben Cumberbatch bounce around on wires. That's a lot of fun. But everything in between that is just miserable because you have nothing to comment on. Nothing pertains to the story except who hits who and at which point in what order, and that doesn't matter for the pages as long as the fight begins and ends in the places that the story says. All right. So those can be rough days, but all in all, I really, really think writers should be on set because it's just going to help make the movie better.
Yeah.
And too many times you find, you see a movie and as a critic, you go, "Why did they make that choice? Why did they do that?" And the answer is because they were chasing daylight and were running out of time, and the writer wasn't around to give them the fix. And they had to, they ended up not getting it. Yeah, we intended to do that, but we didn't have the time and the money. And not every movie has the money to reshoot. So sometimes you just don't get what you intended for that movie. But having the writer around allows you to solve problems that you wouldn't otherwise catch
Right.
while making the film. And that's something I have to, every once in a while. Scott will make a change, he'll alter something, and I'll see what's going on, and I'll go up and whisper in his ear and go, "Hey, if we do that, that's going to create a problem here. Do you want to change this? What do you want to do?" And then he'll be like, "Oh shit, we can't do this. Oh, hold on, change everything. I've got a different idea." And Scott will go and get it back on track. Or sometimes he'll be like, "No, we need this, but figure out how to change this here since we haven't shot that yet, so that it works with this, because this otherwise this moment's just not going to work." And having that extra person to chew on those problems and have it ready so that Scott can be focused on directing and getting every scene right. He's got this second brain over here that he trusts implicitly, making sure the integrity of the entire film is being intact. And I think that's the job of the writer. And writers that don't want to be on set haven't quite understood that that is part of their job.
If you were to pinpoint a choice that you made in your career, or some sort of inspiration that sort of started the path towards opening doorways for you.
Well, I would pinpoint with March 2008. It was I had just gotten done talking to a bunch of folks about what was happening in the critic industry, what was happening online, the rise of social media, what this all meant for our careers. And I realized that no one was listening. And what happened was that caused me to go, I need to get out of this, and I got to do something creative. I had learned that writing film reviews felt, every Friday I was relieved that I didn't have to work for 2 days, and then would start feeling the tension on Saturday that, oh, tomorrow I got to start writing again. I got to start treading water. And it's treading every time you get through the big release, there's another release next week that you got to cover. And it's just treading water without, writing anything that really would be considered meaningful or long form. I mean, the truth is, over the course of 10 years as a film critic, I wrote nearly 5,000 pieces of review or film news, and most of that's gone now. It's just vaporized. The sites don't exist anymore. You may be able to find small archived versions of what survives on the ever dwindling Wayback Machine. We're finding that it's harder and harder to find a lot of that older stuff. So, nearly 5,000 pieces of my work are just gone. So I was right to feel like I was treading water and that it didn't really ultimately matter. But the work that I did was being, put in, ultimately was paying off. And I knew that I had a platform and I knew that I had connections. And I was like, I'm going to sit down and write my first book. And I'm going to actually write a novel. I'm going to polish it. I'm going to finish it. And that's what I did. I set out to write that book. And that was the thing that was the moment that I chose that I was a serious writer, that I wasn't just a film critic. I was serious as a film critic. I'm not dissing on that in any way, but like, I am going to be a creative writer. I'm going to get out there, because if I don't, there's not going to be a career for me here in the thing I've been working on. And what else am I qualified to do? I can't really go back and punch a clock at video stores. I just can't do it anymore. I did that for 6 years. I waited tables for 4.5 years. I had to have a big boy job. I had to get out there, but I really felt that I needed to be creative, because if I didn't, I was going to, pull my hair out. And so it was that decision. And so from that point on, every time any opportunity came my way, I knew I needed to jump on that opportunity. I needed to take it seriously. So all that self-doubt was then left behind, so that when Scott said, to me, I want you to write up a 3 to 5 page synopsis of Sinister. It wasn't called that at the time, but 3 to 5 pages on that. Register it with the WGA, send it to me, and I'll take it out next week. That's what I did. I got home from Vegas, and the next day, I wrote that thing, registered it, sent it to Scott, and he was true to his word. He took that out and had it in offices within a few days, and within a week and a half, I was in offices, and I was pitching and ready to move on. And by March of that year, 2011, I was ready to leave film criticism behind, and go on and take my swing as a screenwriter, and hopefully never have to look back. And that's what ended up happening. But that decision in 2008 to take myself seriously, to move forward, to not have the say, to be going without a net, really was that decision. And that's the whole reason I'm here today.
I think that's great, man, because a lot of people listening are in a similar space of whether they're on YouTube or they're writing or they're on TikTok or whatever, they're creating something, and a lot of people I've spoken to who've asked me to talk to them about similar adjustments in their careers have mentioned that they do feel kind of trapped by, like you said, the weekly treading of water. The idea that, oh, we got a new thing, we got to talk about this. Oh, that one's gone now. And what's the next one? What's the next screening? When's that embargo lift? Yada yada yada. It never ends.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are trying to figure out how to make that transition. And I think the secret sauce for you and for what a lot of people I think as well is to say, you know what, this is a serious goal. This is
Hmm.
not something that would maybe be cool to do one day. This is like really what I'm going to do right now. And you sat down and you did it. And a lot of folks either don't find the time or they don't make the time to do that actually. They say, I want to do this. That'd be cool to do one day, but they don't
Yep.
take the 30 minutes before bed to write a page or half a page or a paragraph or whatever. Even if people could just sit down in their bed 30 minutes before bed and instead of scrolling Netflix, write a page or draw a
Yeah.
storyboard or something, it can be done.
Oh no, I mean, that's my entire philosophy. And one of the things I think we're having a problem with right now is there's this very strong pushback against hustle culture. And I think people have conflated hustle culture and taking some of your spare time to work on your dream as being the same thing when they are absolutely not. Hustle culture is the concept that any time that you have spare time is time you can be making money. And that's not what we're talking about here. Working towards your dream, working towards your next career, sitting down to write the novel is the same as, working a job and going to night school. There are some jobs that you need a diploma for, and there's some jobs you need proof of your talent for. And that's what, writing is. That's what creating is, filmmaking is you kind of have that proof in the pudding. No one's going to hire you because you sit there and pitch them a good idea. They're going to want to look at some of your other writing. So you got to have some of that somewhere. And yeah, that half an hour, that hour, that's it. That's what you need. It's why I mean, I get shit for it, but I love flipping people the bird for it when I hop on Twitter or Blue Sky. And on Saturday afternoon, I'm like, hey, it's Saturday afternoon. Hey, and I always go, hey, you on the couch. Yeah, you staring at Twitter. Maybe now is a good time to work on that project you keep saying you want to put an hour into. And I get a bunch of people who tell me to fuck off and it's their Saturday and stop making them feel guilty. And it's like, I wasn't talking to you. If you worked all week, if you got your writing done, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to that guy that's been telling himself, Saturday, I'm going to sit down and write. And every time I do that, I get a dozen, 2 dozen people that go, hey, thanks, man, for reminding me. I've been meaning to do it all day. I'm going to go write those pages. And you get the pages in. I always tell people, I'm a big minimum daily page guy of like setting it low. I think most writers should start at 1 page a day, and that's your goal. That's it. I'm a professional. I do this professionally and get paid a stupid amount of money to do it. And my minimum daily page is 3 pages. That's what I set for myself. Because if I write 3 pages a day, I have a first draft in 5 weeks. Like
Yeah.
that's just if I hit the target. But you don't just write 3 pages in a day. Sometimes you write five. Some days you're really on fire and you write 8 or 10. Some days you're at the end and you're like, I know where it is, and you have a 25 page day. But the thing is you never go, hey, you had a 25 page day yesterday. Let's see how far you can go today. It's like, no, no, no. Today it's back to three. If you have another 25 page day, that's fucking epic, but you hit your three. And then you see from there. And I think, how much can a page is 300 words. That's 10 full tweets. If you're a person who tweets 10 times in a given day, you can write a page in a day because you already have that time. That's it. That's all you got to do. You do 1 page a day, 5 days a week. You are writing 2 scripts a year. That's it. 2 whole scripts in a year of half an hour to an hour of your time tops. Um, yeah, it really is taking yourself seriously and just putting in that tiny bit of time because you don't owe it to anyone but yourself. And that's the thing is, you're putting in that time because you're going through this is why you and I have talked privately about this multiple times. You're literally going through the same stuff I went to. You get to that point where you're like, I really want to not be beholden to what the rest of society is telling me to be creative. I kind of want to be creative on my own. And
Yeah.
so you're doing that work because you realize that. And you're like, no one's going to hand me a movie. I have to make it myself. And then people will be like, oh, we believed in you the whole time. I've been a fan of yours since 2015.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's
and it's
right.
like,
Yeah.
well, when I was sat in those offices in the first 2 years of being a screenwriter, it was always, oh, hey, we're a big fan. Oh, we've been reading you for years. And I don't always believe them. You can't believe them because they probably they Googled you or checked your
Hmm.
wiki and they know they should acknowledge that. So you just kind of be like, okay, great. And sometimes you'll find out that they really are fans. And, some of my favorite things in the industry have been getting in meetings with people and having a producer say, hey, before we start, I just want to say, I worked on this film 15 years ago and we really believed in it and it didn't do that great, but you wrote this amazing review on Ain't It Cool News and you were there pimping for us. And I just want to say thank you for supporting us back then. And it's like, oh, that's great. I love that movie. Oh man, thank you. And so those become worth it.
Yeah.
But you'll hear this. You'll hear a lot of like, oh man, I love your stuff. I've been watching you on YouTube for years. And you'll just be there like, all right.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
just never quiz them because that will you never cause that awkward moment. They will not forgive you.
This was incredibly inspiring for me, and I'm sure for everyone listening. You heard it from him first. You really do need to take your goals seriously, and don't just look at them as if they are something that maybe you'll do one of these days, like you'll clean out the garage or something. If you're going to start writing, if you're going to start directing, if you're going to start acting or whatever it is that you want to do, take those first steps. It's not going to happen immediately.
Yeah, it's that's the nature of it is it's a lot of work and then eventually if you've done a lot of work and you've succeeded enough and you get that one good success, overnight success.
Seriously though, man, thank you so much for coming on. It really means a lot to me. I mean it when I say that you're very inspiring to me. And you've got Black Phone 2 coming out. I know you can't say shit about it, but is there anything else you're working on, novels or anything like that?
Yeah, I just wrote a new novella. I don't know what it's called yet. It's temporarily called Like Ash. It's a novella that takes place between my two books, Day Zero and Sea of Rust. So if you're a fan of those books, I've got a new novella coming out. And apart from that, we've got The Gorge coming out later this year, a movie that
Right,
I wrote on and produced with Scott.
right.
We're in post production on that right now. And so, yeah, Black Phone 2, we're going to hopefully shoot later this year. Going well so far, and we'll see how
Exciting
that
shit.
comes.
It's going to be great, man. Well, thank you once again.
Thanks for having me, brother. It's been so great to be on.